News Radio 700 WLW.
Let's talk to a workplace expert in the matter. Joel Patterson, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, Joel, what are we looking at here? You just heard Rachel and I talking. Is how do you heal this in the workplace when it's obvious that timbers and emotions are running very high on both sides. So how do you handle that?
Well, you're completely right in that it feels like it's a little worse this year than it has in the years past, and the data proves that out. 1 in 3 are saying that they've changed their opinion of a coworker because of how they view their politics. I mean, that tells you something right there. And then there was a report out recently for HR professionals that said that 44% are reporting more political volatility this year as compared to 2016 when it was only 26%. So it's clearly been ramped up, and the other thing that you run into and we're about to really hit is once everything is finalized is sometimes people get a little arrogant about it and start gloating, and that is not going to make things any easier.
That's what I was wondering. I mean, in a normal workspace, when you go around and you start, doing your victory dance, your end zone dance, just, if your side wins, if let's say you're a Biden fan and Biden wins, just let it go. Don't go in there and do your touchdown dance. But you know what? That's not the way people behave.
Yeah, it's a little childish. It's not,
it totally is. I'm totally agreeing with you.
But it seems like our political conversations these days are kind of childish anyway because it's so us against them and everything that you say. It's so divisive. There can't be any middle ground, it seems. Everybody's trying to convince the other side that they're dumb. It really is like a bunch of fifth graders having a conversation. And when it comes to business, I've been doing having a lot of conversations with other business owners, with people like you guys, and really kind of talking through what is a business supposed to do about this? How are they supposed to handle it?
Right.
And I always recommend they've got 2 options. One is they've really got to lean on their culture. Do they have values in place that they use to hire and fire people? Do people treat each other with respect and like adults? And, that's a mixed bag. Some companies are really good at that and some aren't. And if you don't do it that way, then you have to have a very clear policy that determines what you can and cannot say. And unfortunately, it comes down to this kind of culture of compliance where you've got to have a rule for absolutely every situation that could possibly occur. And you really can't get to that level of detail, but you got to at least try and make sure that it's fair and equitable to everyone involved.
Joel, how much of a role is social media playing in all of this in the workplace right now?
I mean, it's just like everything in life. It's bigger than it should be, but it's absolutely significant. Everybody knows that what they say on social media is probably more important than what they say in a conversation these days because it doesn't go anywhere. Somebody's always got record of it. So you've got that going for you that people do understand that. But unfortunately, standing behind a computer screen, like everybody's talked about it, people get very bold and they say things that aren't appropriate. And if they're saying that on the clock during work hours, you can absolutely do something about that. The law is pretty clear in that if it's during work hours for private industry, you can determine whether or not that is an offense that can be disciplined. But if it's in the evening, it's not nearly that clear cut. And so people can say things and even if they say, hey, this is my personal opinion, if it's on a work Twitter account or something like that, it can still have a negative impact on your overall reputation.
Joel Patterson is our guest. And Joel, how do you handle it actually in the workplace when, you got a couple of guys around the water cooler or out getting a cup of coffee or whatnot, and somebody says something, and then that guy says something, and back and forth, yada, yada, all of a sudden you've got a situation. How in the world do you handle that?
Well, you got to fall back on your policy. And if you don't have one, then you're going to have to sit down with them and try to have a very adult conversation. A lot of times people wonder, is legally, what can they do? I mean, this is America, is what everybody says, and I've got free speech, and it's protected. Well, the reality is in the private sector, it's not. Most states agree. This is a kind of a state-by-state thing, but most states have rules in place that allow employers to fire employees if during the day they are doing things that are aggressive could be considered bullying, and I don't think there's any doubt that a lot of the things that are happening these days border on a bullying behavior. And so they have the legal protections to do something, especially if it's in front of customers. If it's in front of customers, it's very clear. But you're really going to have to sit down and hope that you can mediate these things, separate them to their own respective corners, and maybe put them in timeout.
Joel, you bring up a really interesting point, which I think is probably the heart attack that employers are having right now, which is if you have an employee that on either side that gets too invested in this, and you've done the disciplinary action, now you have to take the action of terminating them. Is that going to get you into a lawsuit? Is that going to drag you into court because you are keeping someone from basically their free speech?
Yeah, really, the issue isn't whether or not that they can let them go for this, because it's clear that they can in most states, not everyone, but in most states. I'm in Texas, and we can do anything here, right?
Apparently.
But what you really got to watch out for is whether or not that can lead to another set of problems. So, if, for example, whoever that person is has protected characteristic like race or gender or religion, and you decide to let them go for their political comments, it's going to all of a sudden become a he versus, he said, she said kind of situation, and they're going to have to prove that, but it just opens you up for more risk. And so you really got to look at that. Is this worth it? Can I just sit down and mediate what's happening here, or maybe write them up? Hopefully, there's a process in place in your organization for those kind of activities, at least some kind of disciplinary review. And but if not, then you're really putting yourself out there and risking future issues if you go ahead and fire them.
So, Joel, one final question. You brought up the First Amendment a little while ago. Can a boss, a supervisor, ban political talk from the office?
They absolutely can. Yeah,
that's what I'm wondering.
Again, most states.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's really, in this election cycle, that's what a lot of companies are doing, because it's not even just the face-to-face conversations, they're not happening as much right now, but the Zoom conversations could still be a thing. And it's not even when maybe they're not even talking, maybe they're just wearing a political campaign shirt. There was a survey that came out a couple of months ago that said that almost half of the people that they interviewed under 30 believed that if a supervisor was found being a contributor to the Trump campaign, they should be fired. And you think about that, right? I mean, that is a slippery slope that we're heading down. And if people are to that level of aggressive behavior, thinking that people should be fired for wearing a shirt or making a donation, then it's probably better off to just ask your employees to leave that stuff at home. Don't put it on. Don't wear it when you're on a Zoom call. Let's keep the political talk to a minimum. I mean, they're still going to talk. Sure. We're people. We still want to socialize, but hopefully you've instilled in them enough, and you've got the appropriate rules in place to keep it to a minimum.
Joel, with that, we'll let you go. Thanks so much.
Y'all have a great weekend.
Joel Patterson, workplace expert.